Hi class, it's Bill Berry with a continuing video in our series on views and functions. The first two videos covered all the view stuff, so now we're really just doing a quick survey of functions. This is not an exhaustive list or a lot of practice. If you're in class, we'll do a little bit of practice together maybe, but the idea here is that we just want you to know about the fact that functions exist here, and there are a lot of useful functions, and I just want you to have a little flag in your brain that says, if I need some of these functions, then I know they exist and I can go find them, right? So let's jump down there and start looking. There are three main types of functions that we're going to do a little look at in our survey. The first is string, right? There are going to be functions that manipulate text, right, that deal with text. So you're trying to find out their lengths or getting rid of extra stuff in them or taking out pieces from them or making them upper or lower case, right? These are all kinds of typical string operations. Manipulating text. There are also numeric functions. So if you need to convert between different kinds of integers and floating points, or if you want to do mathematical types of things or generate random numbers, then numeric functions are your friend. Now, the other one is date and time. SQL is used a lot in business, right? All kinds of SQLs are very common in business, and they have a very rich set of date-time functions because businesses use a lot of date math, right? They do a lot. So we'll take a peek at that. There's some really interesting and unusual things here. And don't forget also that you can nest functions. You can call one from inside another one, and that should not be too much of a surprise, right? You can do a concat, and inside the concat you could call math.round, for instance. So don't be too surprised that these things can be combined, right? So first, let's take a quick peek at some of the string or text-based functions that exist out here. So here is a sampler of some of those things. You can, as we know, concatenate two strings together. You also have these functions that are all called trim, something trim. This is very typical in programming languages as well. Trimming is generally meaning to take off white space, right? To take off stuff that you wouldn't need that needs to sort of normalize the string. So you can trim off white space from the left using ltrim, or the right using rtrim, or you can use the trim command, which can affect both. Right, both ends, leading or trailing. I think the default of that should be both. So you can remove this white space. White space means spaces, tabs, returns, any other junk that you wouldn't consider part of the string. So very useful stuff. You can certainly find the length of a string. You can also see whether one string is in another, right? Is this particular thing, is there a backslash in this particular string? You can pull off parts of one string to make another string, like I want to pull off parts from the left or the right or somewhere in the middle. You can also replace characters in your string with another character, so that's useful, or insert data into your string. You can reverse a string. This one's always puzzling. I wonder who made this up and for what purpose. There will be some algorithms that you can certainly imagine that would make use of it, but it to me seems to stand out as an unusual one in this list. You can convert to lowercase and uppercase. That's great. You can also pad at the left or the right so that you can add zeros, for instance, or you can do spaces, right? You can sort of pad with a certain character. And here you can also generate a certain number of spaces in case you need that for some reason, in a concat maybe, and you can cause a repetition, right? You can repeat a certain string a certain number of times, like repeat quote or apostrophe asterisk, and you can make 20 of those and it will generate 20 asterisks for you. So there's going to be some examples, and if you want to stop and pause the video, you can certainly do that. I'm not going to stop here, but here are some examples of what you could do with functions, and then you know, there certainly are some answers here. We may do these together in class, so I'm going to skip those and move on to the next topic. Okay, so now let's look at our numeric functions, right? So what do we have in that toolbox for numeric functions? Well, we have some typical mathematical ones. If we need to round, right, all of these things tend to turn floating point numbers into integers. So do you want to round using normal rounding rules? And if so, to what length? How many number of digits, right? You can round to 2 digits. That would be to the pennies, for instance, or you can do something else. You can also truncate to a certain length as well. So if you just want to chop rather than round, you can do that. And then there are two mathematical operations, ceiling and floor. Ceiling always moves up, floor always moves down, but those things can be used to take floating point numbers and turn them into integers. You can also do some common mathematical things, right? You can do absolute values, find the sign of a number, so it will tell you whether it's positive or negative. You can also take the square root or raise a number to a power, so all of that is available to you. You can also generate random numbers. This doesn't have a lot of functionality. It will always generate a number between 0 and 0.9999, never quite 1. This integer is a seed, not a size, right? So, but that can be used, for instance, sometimes you want to call 5 random customers or something like that, right? So all of these can be useful. I don't, they're a small number, and I'm not sure in normal business SQL you'll see a lot of that, but maybe rounding and things like that fairly commonly. So again, there are going to be some examples here. If you're in class with me, we may walk through some of that together, but I will leave you to think about those, and we'll move on to the next topic. All right, so last but not least, let's look at date and time options. So date and time, as I said, it's a pretty rich set here in MySQL. You can do all sorts of things like finding out the current date and time. You can use one of these things, just the current date, just the current time. You can also pull out portions of dates and times using day of month, month, year, minute, second. You can even find out the day of the week, right? You give it a certain date and it'll give you a number representing 0 being, I think 0 is Sunday. And so it'll give you a number to tell you what day of the week a certain thing happened on. So you can find out what day you were born, what day a customer paid, whatever. You can also find the quarter, right, and what day of the year, giving you a number saying how many days into the year you were. So a very rich set of functions here. You can also get text, so what is the name of the day, what's the name of the month, right? You can also do date math, which is pretty cool. You can say, take this date and I want to add to it, and notice this interesting syntax. You say the keyword interval and then you put an expression. So for instance, you say, I want to add an interval of 8 hour. Notice this is not pluraled, right? So don't try to pluralize it and say 8 hours. It's always singular. But this will take this date and add 8 hours, or date time, right? This could be a date and time. Add 8 hours, or interval 30 day, right? If you wanted to figure out when an invoice was due, you could add 30 days to a certain date. So that's pretty cool, right? Date addition and subtraction. Find the difference between two dates, right? So you know how many days, months, or days and whatever's and time, right, were between those two things. So a very rich set of date time functions. You can also format date and time, right? There's a very sophisticated date formatting set of tools, and you use these little codes, right? You say the date and then you give it the format, which is a string that represents all of the formatting that you want to do. So you'll notice here I've done a date format and I'm using capital W. So you can now go down and go, oh, where's the capital W? Oh, here it is. This is the weekday name. So I'm going to get Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, etc. Then capital M, where is that? That's over here. Capital M, that's the month name. So you use these little codes, and then anything else that you use in the string is just a literal, like commas and spaces, and it's going to turn that date into whatever you ask. So here's the weekday name, here's the month name, and here's this thing, that's the capital D, that's the day of the month with the ordinal, suffix, right? Is that cardinal or ordinal? Anyway, so you can really format dates and times in a very sophisticated manner if you want to be very specific about what your dates and times look like. As before, here are some exercises if you want to play, so you can try these things out. If we're in class together, we might be able to do this, but otherwise I'm going to move forward. All right, there are a couple of just miscellaneous functions that I want to cover quickly. First is if. Now, if here is not like if in a programming language, right? This is not a programming language control statement at this point. We're talking about something very different. Let me get Notepad up and we'll do an example of this. If here is going to be more like Excel's if. Have you ever used that? Right? If you want to in Excel, you can say something like this. If cell D4 is greater than 100, then put greater, otherwise put lower. right? So that would be an Excel formula that would yield either the word greater or lower in this cell, depending on the contents of the cell D4, right? This is more like that, in that what you're doing here is you're putting a result in a column, right? You're not controlling program flow, you're figuring out what goes in this column. So you can say in this output column, if the vendor city happens to be Fresno, I want to see the word local. If it's not Fresno, I want to see remote. So one of those two words is actually going to appear in your output, right, as a column. All right, so it's a different kind of way to think about if. And you can also say if null, right? So sometimes you don't want to see the null output. That little null sign is kind of throws people sometimes, and if you want to see something else, you can say, look, if that thing is null, rather than showing that little null tag, you can actually put this text in the column output, right? So that sort of simplifies the view maybe for the results for some people. So if and if null are interesting functions. A more interesting one even is the case function. And so with case, you can do a select, for instance, when you're doing a select, and you can base the output on one particular column, one particular expression like terms ID, and then you say when, and you say if terms ID is 1, then I want to see this output in the column. But if it's 2, I want to see this. So notice it's taking this, focusing all on this particular column, and decoding the numbers into something else. So that's very useful, and you can sort of get a lot of different outputs in the columns based on this one particular expression. So that's a little more fancy way to do a series of sort of decodes like that. So there's more to the case function. It gets a little bit more interesting when you want to do ranges, but that's the basics of it. So that brings us to the end of our quick survey of functions. We haven't covered the world here, but I just wanted to give you a little sampler and tell you about some of the things that are available so that you'll know, again, when you think back, maybe some of these will be a little flag in your brain and you'll say, ah, I know that there's something like that, I can go find it. So rich set of functions in MySQL. Good luck using those. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in another video soon, I hope.